In today's photo deconstruction, I'm going to show you how I created a David Bowie-inspired beauty image using gels, shutter drag, and the Pantone Color of the Year. Hey everybody, Lindsay Adler here, and if you follow my work and my YouTube videos, you know that every year I like to shoot the Pantone Color of the Year, and this year, 2022, the theme or the color is Very Peri. Now, one of the reasons that, or some of the many reasons that I like to shoot the color of the year is, first of all, it helps me be SEO friendly, search engine friendly. So when people are searching for the color of the year, my images show up. Now, I also like to stay on top of trends. So having the color of the year in my work shows that I am aware of what is trending in the industry. And then lastly, I just like to give myself creative challenges. And that is exactly what I did for the creation of this photograph. I was working with a very talented makeup artist, and I showed her some inspiration. I showed her Very Peri as a color palette, and then I showed her an image that I really liked that had a bunch of gems and rhinestones on the face. And so when we were looking at our model, she had this awesome hair. She's a beautiful model, and she had this like very vintagey hair. And so we started to push towards a David Bowie inspiration. And so this is the look that she presented me. And so my challenge was to figure out, what can I do to take this awesome hair and makeup and add the Very Peri into the mix for an image that is different, that's eye-catching. And so let's take a look behind the scenes to see how I created this shot. Let's begin with our main light. To the left-hand side of the frame, you can see that there is a zoom reflector with a purple gel. Now the purple gel, of course, is because I wanted to integrate Very Peri, the purple, into the scene. The zoom reflector is because I wanted a hard light modifier. The hard light modifier was not only to carve out her cheekbones and her jawline, but also because I wanted a more specular light source that would give me nice little shiny reflections on those gemstones. But when I lit with that main light, I felt like the shot was looking a little bit too dark for my vision. Like the shadows were too heavy, it wasn't as sparkly and glowy. And that's why I added my second light source, which is the fill light, which was a little bit lower, a little bit more to the right-hand side, and again, with a purple gel. And so this was used to lift and fill in the shadows, but to keep everything in that purple hue. Now, when I was looking at this, I thought that her hair was kind of just blending into the background, and I loved the hairstyle, but it was getting lost. So that's when we added our third strobe from above, which was a 1x4 foot strip softbox with a grid. Notice I have this kind of boomed out over my subject, and so that would create a top-down light that just beautifully carved out her hair. The grid was added so that I wouldn't have any lens flare kicking towards my camera. You can see, even in this behind-the-scenes photo, that there's a kiss of light on the top of her hair. All right, so that's 3 strobes. You see that there's a fourth one in this shot. There's a background light in the lower right-hand corner here. Well, this background light I did not actually use as a strobe. I did not have it fire. I used this only as a modeling light, as a constant light source. Now the background that I'm using is Savage Universal's Orchid Seamless Paper. The Orchid is the closest to the Very Peri. So you may ask, why would I have the light pointed at the background if it's not firing, if it's not a strobe? Okay, so here's the deal. I was looking at these rhinestones, and I know from experience that with rhinestones, you can do really cool, creative in-camera streaks and blurs if you use something called shutter drag. Now, shutter drag means that you're going to use a slower shutter speed. So for example, typically in the studio, you shoot at or near your sync speed, which in my case would be 1/200th of a second. However, if I use a slower shutter speed, a 30th of a second, a 10th of a second, a 4th of a second, what happens is those slow shutter speed allow in ambient light. And then I can move my camera and create really interesting blurs, especially on those specular highlights like the gems. So here's what I had in mind, is I was going to use a slower shutter speed, and in that, pick up on some of the gems and kind of move my camera to create streaks. But also for the background light, if I didn't have it strobe, I'd allow that modeling light to register on the background, and then I could create kind of cool hazes or blurs around my subject. So that was what I had in mind. Now, don't get me wrong, I originally tried this with that background light firing, but everything was just too crisp. It wasn't as painterly. It didn't have that beautiful haze. So I eventually turned off the strobe and just used the modeling light. But because the background is already purple, it would show up purple. Now real quick, let's talk about where my camera settings ended up before we go back and visit the final shot. I was shooting with the Canon R5 and the 24-105. It was really important that I used a zoom lens because I wanted to be able to zoom and move my camera, which would help me create those streaks during the shutter drag. Now you'll notice I used 1/4 of a second. Really, really, really long shutter speed. And the reason I did this is because that's what would allow the ambient light to show through. You may ask as well, looking at the final shot, Well, if you use a really long shutter speed and you're allowing ambient light to show through, so modeling lights and ambient light in the space, how is the subject frozen perfectly in place? Well, if you look closely, there actually is blur and a little bit of haze around her, but that's because the strobes were still firing on her face and that freezes the subject, making them crisp. Now, if this is all a little bit maybe over your head or like you're just not really familiar with this, the concept or the technique of shutter drag, I have several tutorials that take you through this. So first of all, you can find videos on shutter drag, both on Adorama TV that I've done, as well as my own YouTube channel. And if you check out my Creative Studio lighting guide, I cover shutter drag in a couple of the setups to show you how you can use it to bring life and movement and energy to your shots. And we talked about the lighting in depth, but let's actually look at the shot and see what each light is doing in the final image. Our main light was that zoom reflector with a purple gel hard light. So that's the main light on the face. You can see the catch light in the top left of her eye. And then you see the shadow really crisp cast by her nose, that strong shadow underneath the jawline. That's what the main light is doing. And then our second light, the fill light, is what fills in these shadows. We added that purple gel. Okay, so we've got that going on here. Then you can see the hair light from above kissing the top of her hair. And then you see the final light, which is not a strobe, the constant light, the modeling light in the bottom left-hand corner, which is exposing and lighting the background. So what did my shutter drag do? What did the long exposure do? You can see the long exposure creates those little movements, those little specular highlights created on the gems. But also, do you see the little haze or blur around the subject's body? Using the longer shutter speed allowed me to have the light in the background show up. And so when I move my camera, it would kind of blur a little bit. If I only had the background light as a strobe, it would freeze and you wouldn't get that same haze around the edges. So again, this is not a beginner or a 101 setup. This is definitely something more advanced. Now, if you ever have wanted to do a hands-on workshop with me, I actually have an advanced studio lighting workshop where I talk about things like shutter drag. All right, so now I just want to show you a little bit of what we captured in camera versus what was achieved in post. And guess what? It was pretty close in camera. Like, it looked almost exactly like the end shot. There were a few things I wanted to change. First of all, I thought her back shoulder looked a little pointy, which is a little distracting. And then I had pulled the top down so we could have lots of beautiful clavicles and shoulders, but she was kind of holding underneath her armpit so I could see her hand in the back. And I found that distracting. So I knew I wanted to retouch that out. Plus, there were a few little errant hairs that were sticking out. But man, her skin was pretty perfect, even though I'm using hard light. By the way, as I zoom in here, notice that the strobes froze the subject's face in place, but the movement of the camera and the ambient light registering does make it a little hazy. So it is not tack sharp per se. All right, so let's take a look again at the before and after. So here's in camera, no adjustments, and then here's the cleanup. So you can see it was pretty close in camera to what the final shot looked like. And I far prefer to try to capture the creative effects in camera rather than trying to add them in post, because sometimes those unexpected results, the movement of the camera or the blur, sometimes that's what gets inspiring. And it's often even better than I would have come up with if I tried to recreate it in Photoshop. So if you would like to learn more about the creative lighting techniques or using gels or shutter drag, be sure to visit learnwithlindsay.com. I have several tutorials there, or pour back through my YouTube channel. I have many different videos that cover several of these techniques. Now, if you'd like to see more of these photo deconstructions and you enjoyed this one, be sure to like and subscribe because I have many more videos just like this coming your way. See you next time, guys.